The October air in Chicago had a sharpness to it, the kind that slipped through window panes and reminded you that summer's warmth was gone for good. Inside the two-story brick house on the quiet residential street, the silence felt heavier than the wind outside. Emily sat at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring at the front door that had just closed behind her husband. Daniel had left for work 15 minutes later than usual. He had smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and assured her that a project at the office was keeping him longer these days. It sounded believable, too believable. Yet something in his eyes, a flicker of distraction, unsettled her. For weeks, Emily had felt the shift. Their conversations had become shorter, practical, stripped of the warmth that once defined their marriage. Dinner, once an intimate ritual, was now quiet and mechanical. Even the small gestures, his arm brushing hers as they passed in the kitchen, the way he used to linger before leaving for work, had disappeared into routine. She couldn't say why it gnawed at her so much. People changed, marriages slowed, and yet Emily felt as though she were living next to a stranger wearing her husband's skin. "Late again?" her sister Claire had asked just the night before over the phone. Emily had laughed softly, covering the unease. "Yeah, he's just busy. You know Daniel." But the truth was, she didn't know him anymore, or at least not the version of him that slipped out of bed after midnight thinking she was asleep, only to return an hour later with a calm expression and no explanation. Tonight, as she cleared the remnants of breakfast, she noticed the faintest trace of perfume on his jacket when she picked it up from the chair. It wasn't hers. The scent was floral, sweet, young, and it clung stubbornly to the fabric. Emily froze, jacket in hand. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to breathe, folding it neatly and hanging it by the door. No accusations yet, not until she knew more. The day carried on in its normal rhythm, but nothing felt normal. The ticking of the clock was too loud. The empty rooms seemed too vast. Every sound, every silence became a reminder of the distance growing between them. That night, Daniel came home late again. His tie loosened, his shirt slightly wrinkled. He looked tired, but his eyes held a strange light, a kind of guardedness, as if he were carrying something she couldn't see. "You're late," Emily said quietly as he placed his briefcase down. Daniel kissed her cheek quickly, avoiding her gaze. "Told you, Em. It's the project. Deadline's a mess." Her lips pressed into a thin smile. "Of course." The two words carried weight, but Daniel didn't seem to hear them. He poured himself a drink, settled on the couch, and scrolled through his phone, detached. Emily watched him, her mind a whirl of doubt and suspicion, the silence between them stretching like a taut wire ready to snap. Later, when the lights dimmed and the house fell still, Emily lay awake listening to the sound of Daniel's breathing beside her. She stared at the ceiling, the perfume scent still vivid in her memory. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The first crack in a silence that would soon shatter everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her family, and herself. The next morning began like any other, but to Emily, the air in the house felt different. Daniel moved with an ease that seemed almost rehearsed, his smile sharp but hollow, like a mask he had grown comfortable wearing. He poured coffee, adjusted his tie, and kissed her cheek. All the gestures of a dutiful husband. Yet Emily felt like she was standing across from an impersonator. The real Daniel, the one who used to light up at the sight of her, was gone, replaced by a man she no longer recognized. Emily's eyes lingered on him as he scrolled through his phone, fingers tapping with an urgency that had nothing to do with business. He locked the screen quickly when he noticed her watching. "You okay?" he asked casually, voice steady. "Fine," she replied, though her tone betrayed the doubt simmering beneath the surface. But she wasn't fine. Every detail screamed at her, the way he avoided her gaze, the late nights that stretched into early mornings, the unfamiliar perfume that refused to leave her memory. These weren't coincidences. They were signs. At work, Emily struggled to focus. Her colleagues spoke around her, their words muffled by the storm in her head. By lunchtime, she had convinced herself to check something she had never dared to before. Daniel's phone bill. The numbers told their own story. Repeated calls to a number she didn't recognize, often late at night. Short, frequent bursts, as if each word spoken carried a dangerous weight. That evening, Daniel returned home later than usual. He was careful with his explanations, but Emily had grown careful too. She had learned to watch, to listen. Over dinner, she studied him in the soft glow of the kitchen light. His movements were mechanical, his laughter forced. When she asked about his day, he gave short, rehearsed answers, then changed the subject quickly. It was only when they visited her sister's house the following weekend that everything shifted. Family filled the living room, voices warm and overlapping, children darting across the carpet with laughter. Emily clung to the comfort of familiarity, until she noticed something she couldn't ignore. Sarah, her niece, was there. 17, with a restless energy that filled every room. She had grown into a striking young woman, confident, yet vulnerable. Emily watched as Daniel greeted her. It should have been nothing more than an uncle's smile, a polite exchange. But it wasn't. Their eyes lingered too long. A flicker passed between them, subtle but undeniable. Daniel's posture softened in her presence, his guarded expression melting into something freer, lighter. And Sarah, though quick to look away, blushed faintly, as if caught in the glow of a secret. Emily felt her stomach twist. It was too familiar, too intimate for comfort. She tried to brush it off as imagination, but the image seared into her mind, refusing to fade. Later that night, while Daniel laughed with her brother-in-law over a glass of whiskey, Emily caught Sarah alone in the kitchen. The girl was scrolling through her phone, thumbs moving quickly, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. Emily's eyes darted to the screen, but Sarah angled it away instantly, cheeks flushed. "Everything okay?" Emily asked gently, though her voice carried a sharp undertone. Sarah nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze. "Yeah, just school stuff." It was a flimsy lie. Emily felt the words lodge in her chest like a shard of glass. She wanted to press, to demand the truth, but something stopped her. Not yet. Not here. When they returned home that night, Daniel slipped into the shower, humming softly to himself. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. That look between them, that glance. It wasn't nothing. It was the confirmation she had feared. She didn't have proof yet, but instinct told her the truth. And instincts, Emily knew, were rarely wrong. As she lay awake beside Daniel, her eyes open to the dark ceiling, a thought pulsed through her like a warning. This wasn't just distance. This was betrayal, and she was about to uncover just how deep it ran. Emily couldn't shake the memory of that glance between Daniel and Sarah. It played in her mind over and over, looping like a cruel film reel. The blush on Sarah's cheeks, the ease in Daniel's smile. It was the kind of look people shared when the world wasn't supposed to notice. And Emily had noticed. Days passed, but the tension only grew. Daniel became more distracted at home, his phone constantly in his hand, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes long after midnight. He guarded it like a lifeline, never leaving it unattended, slipping it into his pocket even when he stepped away for a glass of water. Emily started paying closer attention. She tracked the moments when Daniel disappeared into the garage for phone calls, his voice hushed, sentences clipped. She noticed how his mood shifted after family visits, lighter, almost boyish, as though those encounters had refueled him in ways she could not. One evening, while folding laundry, she found a crumpled piece of paper in Daniel's pants pocket. It wasn't much, just a scribbled note with a smiley face and the words, "Don't forget tomorrow." Same place. The handwriting was neat, youthful. Her heart pounded as she stared at it, her mind racing through possibilities, though deep down she already knew. She shoved the note back into his pocket, her hands trembling. No confrontation yet, not until she was certain. The following weekend brought another family gathering, this time a birthday dinner at her sister's house. Emily watched Sarah carefully. The girl's laughter seemed louder near Daniel, her eyes sparkling in ways that spoke more of admiration than innocence. When the cake was served and the room filled with chatter, Emily slipped away for a moment of air. That's when she saw them, Daniel and Sarah, standing near the back porch, shadows overlapping in the dim light. Their voices were low, but the way Sarah leaned in, the way Daniel brushed her arm as he spoke volumes. Later that night, while Daniel laughed with her brother-in-law over a glass of whiskey, Emily caught Sarah alone in the kitchen. The girl was scrolling through her phone, thumbs moving quickly, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. Emily's eyes darted to the screen, but Sarah angled it away instantly, cheeks flushed. "Everything okay?" Emily asked gently, though her voice carried a sharp undertone. Sarah nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze. "Yeah, just school stuff." It was a flimsy lie. Emily felt the words lodge in her chest like a shard of glass. She wanted to press, to demand the truth, but something stopped her. Not yet. Not here. When they returned home that night, Daniel slipped into the shower, humming softly to himself. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. That look between them, that glance. It wasn't nothing. It was the confirmation she had feared. She didn't have proof yet, but instinct told her the truth. And instincts, Emily knew, were rarely wrong. As she lay awake beside Daniel, her eyes open to the dark ceiling, a thought pulsed through her like a warning. This wasn't just distance. This was betrayal, and she was about to uncover just how deep it ran. Emily couldn't shake the memory of that glance between Daniel and Sarah. It played in her mind over and over, looping like a cruel film reel. The blush on Sarah's cheeks, the ease in Daniel's smile. It was the kind of look people shared when the world wasn't supposed to notice, and Emily had noticed. Days passed, but the tension only grew. Daniel became more distracted at home, his phone constantly in his hand, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes long after midnight. He guarded it like a lifeline, never leaving it unattended, slipping it into his pocket even when he stepped away for a glass of water. Emily started paying closer attention. She tracked the moments when Daniel disappeared into the garage for phone calls, his voice hushed, sentences clipped. She noticed how his mood shifted after family visits, lighter, almost boyish, as though those encounters had refueled him in ways she could not. One evening, while folding laundry, she found a crumpled piece of paper in Daniel's pants pocket. It wasn't much, just a scribbled note with a smiley face and the words, "Don't forget tomorrow. Same place." The handwriting was neat, youthful. Her heart pounded as she stared at it, her mind racing through possibilities, though deep down she already knew. She shoved the note back into his pocket, her hands trembling. No confrontation yet, not until she was certain. The following weekend brought another family gathering, this time a birthday dinner at her sister's house. Emily watched Sarah carefully. The girl's laughter seemed louder near Daniel, her eyes sparkling in ways that spoke more of admiration than innocence. When the cake was served and the room filled with chatter, Emily slipped away for a moment of air. That's when she saw them, Daniel and Sarah, standing near the back porch, shadows overlapping in the dim light. Their voices were low, but the way Sarah leaned in, the way Daniel brushed her arm as he spoke volumes. Emily's chest constricted. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. The intimacy of the body language was unmistakable. This wasn't just an uncle comforting a niece. This was something dangerous. Later that night, as they drove home, Emily sat stiffly in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Daniel tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, humming faintly. "You've been quiet," he said after a long stretch of silence. "Just tired," Emily murmured, her voice low, masking the storm inside. Daniel nodded, apparently satisfied, but Emily caught the faintest smirk tugging at his lips, as if he were keeping something deliciously private. It chilled her. The days that followed grew unbearable. Emily began piecing fragments together. Daniel's sudden work trips, Sarah's absences from family dinners, the secretive texts Sarah typed beneath the table when she thought no one was watching. And then came the confirmation. Emily had gone to her sister's house unexpectedly one afternoon, dropping off a forgotten scarf. Sarah wasn't in school that day. When Emily knocked and stepped inside, she heard laughter upstairs, a sound that froze her blood. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step a hammer in her chest. At the end of the hallway, Sarah's bedroom door was slightly ajar. Inside, she glimpsed Daniel sitting on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on Sarah's knee. They were close, too close, his voice low, coaxing, while Sarah looked at him with a mix of fear and devotion. Emily's breath caught. The scene burned into her memory, a brand she would never erase. She didn't burst in. She didn't scream. Instead, she retreated silently, her body numb, her mind spinning. For now, she needed proof, something undeniable. But in her heart, the truth had already shattered her. That night, as Daniel returned home late once more, Emily lay awake in the dark, her body rigid, and her thoughts sharp and unrelenting. She knew what she had seen. She knew what it meant. And soon, she promised herself, the lies would end, no matter the cost. Emily had always believed there were moments in life that split time into before and after. The moment she found her mother's last letter. The moment Daniel had proposed. The moment their son was born. These were milestones of joy and pain carved into memory with unshakable clarity. But nothing prepared her for this. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening. Daniel had left in a rush, muttering something about a late client meeting. He had kissed her quickly, almost carelessly, and disappeared into the storm. Emily stood by the window for a long time, staring at the empty driveway, her reflection ghostly against the glass. Her phone buzzed minutes later with a notification. Not hers, but Daniel's. He had left his tablet on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a new message. Normally, she would have respected the boundary. But tonight, her hands moved on their own, trembling as she unlocked it with the familiar passcode. The message read, "I can't stop thinking about you. Same time tomorrow?" It was from Sarah. Emily's knees buckled, and she nearly dropped the device. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, her vision tunneling as if the walls themselves had collapsed inward. She read it again, the words sharp, undeniable, and cruelly intimate. Scrolling upward, she found more. Weeks of messages, hidden in plain sight. "You looked so beautiful tonight. I wish we didn't have to sneak around. Promise me you won't leave me, Daniel." Each line was a dagger, carving away the remnants of the life she thought she knew. She clutched the tablet to her chest, gasping for air, her heart racing with a cocktail of rage and despair. Her mind screamed at her to stop, but her fingers kept scrolling, desperate and masochistic. The deeper she went, the worse it became. Voice notes filled with whispers, declarations of love, plans to meet in secret. One message made her stomach churn. "When you touched me last night, I felt alive. No one has ever made me feel like you do." Emily slammed the device down, stumbling back as if burned. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle the sob that ripped from her throat. Her world wasn't crumbling. It had already been reduced to ashes. For nearly an hour, she sat motionless at the kitchen table, the tablet still glowing faintly beside her. The rain tapped against the windows like a cruel metronome, counting down the seconds of her unraveling. When Daniel returned later that night, Emily watched him closely. He walked in with that same tired smile, rainwater dripping from his hair, his tie loosened, his lies intact. "Everything okay?" he asked, hanging up his jacket. Emily forced a steady breath. "Yeah, just a long day." Her voice didn't crack. He didn't notice the redness in her eyes, or if he did, he didn't care enough to question it. He poured himself a drink, scrolled through his phone, and settled onto the couch, while Emily sat across from him, holding his secret like a loaded weapon. Every word he spoke, every movement he made, now carried a second meaning. She saw him not as her husband, but as a stranger, a betrayer, a man capable of shattering sacred bonds for selfish desire. Later that night, while he slept soundly beside her, Emily lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Her hands curled into fists against the sheets. Her mind was a storm of images. Daniel's hand on Sarah's knee, the smiley faces in their messages, the heart emojis that mocked her vows. She wanted to scream, to wake him and demand an explanation, to throw the evidence in his face. But she didn't. Not yet. Because beneath the anguish, a new sensation was taking root. Something darker, heavier, and far more dangerous than grief. Resolve. If she confronted him now, he would lie. He would twist the truth, maybe even convince her to doubt her own eyes. But with proof in her possession, Emily had power. And power, she realized, was the only thing that could shatter Daniel's carefully constructed facade. As dawn crept through the curtains, Emily turned to look at her husband's sleeping face. The man who had once been her world now looked like a stranger lying in her bed. Her chest ached, but her mind was cold, deliberate. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a confrontation she could no longer avoid. And as Daniel stirred beside her, oblivious to the storm gathering in her heart, Emily knew one thing with chilling certainty. The silence between them was about to break. The house felt different after that night. Emily moved through it like a ghost, her footsteps quiet, her voice softer than before. She carried herself with restraint, not because she was broken, though she was, but because she was calculating. Daniel didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it, confident in his lies, secure in the secrecy of his affair. He carried on as though nothing had changed, drinking his coffee, leaving for work, sending those messages she now knew by heart. Emily, however, had changed. She no longer asked where he was going, nor did she press for details about his day. Instead, she watched him. Every gesture, every pause in his speech, every smile when his phone buzzed. It all became evidence, fragments of a puzzle that painted a picture of a man she could barely recognize. She wanted to scream at him, to hold the tablet in his face and demand, "How could you?" But her instincts told her silence was stronger. Silence made him careless. Silence let him believe she was still in the dark. One evening, as Daniel scrolled through his phone on the couch, Emily sat across from him, folding laundry slowly. She studied him over the fabric, her hands trembling just enough for her to tuck them beneath the cotton. "Long day?" she asked softly. Daniel didn't look up. "Yeah." Meetings dragged on. His lie slid off his tongue effortlessly. She had the text message saved. The one that said, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place. Same time." Emily murmured, nodding. "You must be exhausted." He smiled faintly, still focused on the screen. "I'll be fine." It was a conversation like any other, but Emily felt the weight of every word. It wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't. The pauses, the distractions, the small curve of his lips that appeared only when Sarah's name lit up his phone. At night, while he slept beside her, Emily lay awake, her eyes fixed on the faint glow of the alarm clock. She could hear his steady breathing, the sound of a man untroubled by guilt. It filled her with a rage so sharp it made her teeth ache. And yet, she remained silent. The confrontation, when it came, wasn't spoken aloud but lived in the spaces between their words. Over breakfast, Daniel reached for her hand, a habitual gesture of affection. She let him, though her skin crawled. "You've been quiet lately," he said, watching her carefully. Emily forced a small smile. "Just tired." It was the same excuse she had given for weeks, and it seemed to satisfy him. He kissed her forehead, blind to the storm raging behind her eyes. But silence had a power of its own. Emily could feel it growing between them, thickening with every lie he told, every secret text he sent. It was no longer just distance. It was a wall, one Daniel didn't realize she had built, brick by brick. She began keeping her own secrets. She printed copies of the messages, hiding them, in a folder at the back of her closet. She wrote notes to herself, details of his comings and goings, a private ledger of betrayal. Each entry hardened her resolve. Daniel believed the silence meant surrender. He believed she was too fragile, too trusting to ever see through him. What he didn't know was that silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. And as Emily studied him across the dinner table one evening, her fork poised in mid-air, she caught Sarah's name flash across his screen. Daniel's thumb brushed over it quickly, too quickly, but not before she saw the faint blush of a heart emoji. Her pulse raced, but her face stayed calm. She met his eyes, her lips curling into the faintest smile. The silence between them was no longer unbearable. It was a weapon. And soon, Emily thought, she wouldn't be the only one holding it. Emily's silence had stretched on for weeks. But it wasn't only Daniel who felt the weight of it. Sarah did too. At first, the girl had seemed emboldened by secrecy, her youthful smile flashing at family gatherings, her voice bright and careless. But as time passed, Emily noticed the cracks. Sarah avoided her eyes now, laughter catching in her throat, words faltering whenever Emily entered the room. It was at another family dinner, a warm Saturday evening filled with clinking glasses and the aroma of roasted chicken, that Emily saw the guilt written across Sarah's face. While everyone else crowded around the table, Sarah sat stiff, pushing food around her plate, glancing nervously toward Daniel whenever she thought no one was watching. Emily said little that night, observing in silence, but her eyes stayed on Sarah until the girl's composure crumbled. After dessert, Sarah excused herself to the porch, her shoulders tight, her phone clenched in her hand like a lifeline. Emily followed. The night air was cool, the city sounds distant. Sarah stood near the railing, arms folded, her back to the door. She didn't turn when Emily stepped outside, though Emily could see her trembling. "Sarah," Emily said softly, her voice carrying both steel and sorrow. The girl flinched, clutching her phone tighter. "Aunt Emily, She stopped, the words choking her before they formed. Emily stepped closer, her eyes sharp but her tone measured. "You don't have to lie to me. I already know." Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Sarah's breath hitched, and then, finally, she turned. Her eyes were glassy, brimming with tears she'd been holding back for too long. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I swear, I didn't. He said he cared about me. He said it was our secret. I didn't know what to do." Emily's chest constricted, fury and heartbreak colliding in a storm of emotion. She clenched her fists at her sides, forcing her voice to stay calm. "You let him. You let my husband do this." Sarah shook her head frantically, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, it wasn't like that. He made me feel like I mattered. He told me I was special, that no one understood him the way I did. I tried to stop it, but he kept pulling me back." Emily closed her eyes briefly, bile rising in her throat. She wanted to scream, to unleash the full force of her rage on the girl before her, but when she looked again, all she saw was a child, confused, manipulated, tangled in Daniel's lies. "Do you love him?" Emily asked, the words slicing through the air. Sarah froze, her lips parting in shock. Her shoulders sagged, and she shook her head slowly. "I thought I did. But it's not love. It can't be. I feel sick all the time. I can't sleep, I can't eat. I hate myself for it." Emily's eyes burned, but her voice was steady. "Then why haven't you stopped?" "Because he won't let me," Sarah whispered. "Every time I try, he says I'm all he has. He makes me feel guilty, like if I leave, I'll ruin him. I don't know how to escape it." Emily stepped closer, her anger boiling beneath her skin. She placed a hand on Sarah's trembling shoulder. "You will stop. Do you hear me? Whatever lies he's told you, whatever power he thinks he has, it ends. You don't belong to him." Sarah broke then, sobbing into her hands, her voice muffled by the night. "I'm so sorry, Aunt Emily. I never wanted to hurt you." Emily's throat tightened, her own tears threatening to spill, but she held them back. She had no space for weakness now. She needed clarity, control. "Sorry doesn't fix this," she said firmly, "but your honesty, it matters, and it means he can't keep hiding anymore." Sarah lifted her tear-streaked face, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Emily looked past her, into the darkness, her expression unreadable. "What I should have done a long time ago." The words hung between them, cold and final. Sarah didn't press further, and Emily didn't explain. There was no need. Both knew that silence was no longer enough. Inside, Daniel's laughter drifted through the walls, oblivious to the storm gathering on the porch. Emily's heart hardened. The truth was out now, spoken aloud, undeniable. The time for silence had ended. The time for confrontation had arrived. Daniel was still laughing in the living room when Emily re-entered the house. His voice carried, smooth and confident, weaving through the air like nothing in the world could touch him. To anyone else, he was the perfect husband, charming, reliable, the life of the evening. But to Emily, after Sarah's trembling confession, he was a monster cloaked in normalcy. She watched him from the doorway for a long moment, her heartbeat steady, her face composed. The storm that had raged inside her was quiet now, replaced by a cold clarity. Sarah's words had given her what she needed, proof, a truth too ugly to keep hidden. Daniel noticed her standing there. "Hey, you disappeared on me. Everything okay?" Emily's lips curved into something resembling a smile, but her eyes did not soften. "We need to talk." The way she said it, sharp, unyielding, made Daniel's laughter falter. He set down his glass and glanced at the guests. "Now? Can't it wait until—" "No." Her voice cut across his. "Now." The living room quieted, the weight of her tone chilling the air. Daniel's eyes flickered with unease before he forced a smile and excused them both, guiding her into the kitchen. The door swung shut behind them. Silence stretched. Emily leaned against the counter, arms folded. "How long?" Daniel blinked. "How long? What?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Don't play with me. How long has it been going on between you and Sarah?" The question landed like a stone dropped in water, ripples of shock breaking through his carefully constructed facade. For the briefest moment, guilt flashed across his face, but he masked it quickly, his voice sharp. "That's ridiculous. She's a child." "Don't you dare!" Emily snapped, her voice rising. I've heard it from her own mouth. The lies, the promises, the way you made her believe she was special. Do you deny it?" Daniel's jaw clenched. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Emily, listen to yourself. She's confused. You know how young people get. Impressionable. Dramatic. She must have twisted something." Her laughter was hollow, bitter. "Twisted? She cried to me, Daniel. She said you wouldn't let her go, that you made her feel guilty every time she tried. Tell me, how much of that was her twisting the truth, and how much was you twisting her?" Daniel's composure cracked, anger flaring in his eyes. "I've sacrificed everything for this family. Do you think I'd risk it all for what?" Emily cut him off, stepping forward, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "For her? For a girl who trusted you? You were supposed to protect her, not destroy her." He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled back, disgust flashing in her eyes. "You don't understand," he said desperately, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "I needed someone who saw me." The kitchen light cast shadows across his face, deepening the lines of tension around his mouth. "Who made me feel alive again? You stopped looking at me years ago." Emily recoiled as if struck. "So this is my fault?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You've shattered everything, Daniel. Our marriage, our family, her innocence. And you stand here, blaming me." For a moment, the mask slipped. Daniel's face twisted with something raw. Fear, anger, shame all tangled together. But just as quickly it hardened again. "If you tell anyone, it will destroy us all. You think Sarah will survive the scandal? You think anyone will believe you didn't know?" Emily's chest tightened, his words slicing through her like knives. He was still manipulating, still turning guilt into a weapon. But this time she didn't flinch. She straightened, her voice clear and cold. "The truth is already out, Daniel, and it's not me who should be afraid of what comes next." Daniel stared at her, his expression unreadable, the silence between them thick with danger. In that silence, Emily knew the battle had only just begun. She had exposed the wound, forced him to confront it. But the fight for justice, for Sarah, for herself, was far from over. The sound of footsteps in the hallway broke the tension. Sarah's voice, small and hesitant, drifted toward the kitchen. "Aunt Emily?" Daniel's head snapped toward the door, his eyes narrowing, panic flickering in their depths. Emily met his gaze, unflinching. "It's over." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. The confrontation had torn the veil away, but Daniel wasn't finished. And neither was he. The storm had only just begun. The days after the confrontation were unbearable. Emily moved through the house like a shadow, quiet, precise, her mind consumed by a single sharp thought. Daniel had crossed a line that could never be repaired. Every smile he offered, every word that dripped with charm, became poison. She watched him closely, studying his patterns. His phone, always in his pocket. His eyes, constantly darting to see if she was observing. His movements, deliberate and calculated, but she was more deliberate. Every gesture she made, every subtle glance, measured. She had learned silence was her ally. At night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over. Daniel's excuses, his desperate justifications, his manipulative words, they circled in her mind like vultures. The betrayal was more than emotional. It had become physical, invasive, poisoning the very foundation of their family. Sarah's confession haunted her. The girl's tear-streaked face, the trembling words, the way she had clung to Emily as though she could protect her. It fueled Emily's rage. She had promised herself then, no one would get away with this. Emily began to plan, quietly, carefully. Not out of vengeance at first, but out of necessity. Daniel had broken every trust she had, eroded every boundary, and the thought that he might continue unpunished was unbearable. She replayed every lie, every stolen glance, every whispered message. Each memory was a brick, building a structure of fury in her chest. She walked through the house with new eyes. Each room seemed loaded with reminders. The hallway where Daniel had brushed past Sarah too intimately. The kitchen where he had texted her. The bedroom where he had laughed, oblivious to the damage around him. These rooms were no longer familiar. They were witnesses, silent and condemning. She knew she was close to a breaking point. A line had been crossed, and no rationalization could erase the ache of betrayal. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams haunted by shadows and voices, Daniel's face morphing into every fear and fury she had contained. Emily's hands shook as she made small, deliberate preparations, not yet confronting him physically, but mapping, noting, rehearsing. The storm within her mind demanded action, but action required precision. She could not let the first surge of anger dictate her movements. When Daniel entered the house late one night, laughing as though nothing had happened, Emily sat quietly on the couch, a book open but unread. She watched him, her chest tight, every nerve on fire. He poured himself a drink, glanced at her casually, and asked, "Everything okay?" Emily's lips curved into a thin, controlled smile. "I'm fine." He didn't believe her, not really, but he said nothing, thinking the war had ended. But it hadn't. Her mind raced through possibilities, each darker than the last. She imagined confrontations that would leave him speechless, revelations that would shatter him entirely. And with each thought, a cold determination hardened in her chest. She knew what must be done, though she didn't yet know when. That night, she wrote in her journal, the ledger of betrayal and evidence she had been keeping. Names, dates, messages, and the small details that proved his obsession. Each line fueled her, not with mere anger, but with a sense of control she had not felt in weeks. By dawn, Emily felt a guillet, riddy she hadn't known since discovering the affair. She could no longer tolerate Daniel's presence, his lies, his manipulations. The confrontation had stripped away civility, leaving only one certainty. Boundaries had been destroyed, and only decisive action could restore some measure of justice. She stood at the window, watching the first light of morning touch the city. Her reflection stared back at her, calm, precise, and terrifying in its stillness. The breaking point had arrived. The storm that had raged in silence for months now had a voice, a purpose, and a plan. And soon, Daniel would see just how far Emily had come. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a battlefield. And she was ready. The house was silent when Emily stepped inside that night. The dim glow of the streetlights filtered through the curtains, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Each room seemed larger, emptier, yet saturated with tension. Daniel was home, unaware of the storm that had been building for months, unaware that tonight would change everything. She had waited for the perfect moment, not out of hesitation, but calculation. Every glance, every secret text, every whispered message from Sarah had been logged, memorized, a map of betrayal she could follow with deadly precision. Daniel was in the kitchen, pouring himself a drink, humming lightly to himself. He glanced at her, his face breaking into a tired yet comforting smile. "You're late," he said casually. Emily's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. "I was waiting for you to come home." He frowned slightly, puzzled by her tone. Before he could ask further, Emily moved swiftly, her hand gripping the small, heavy kitchen knife she had hidden in her jacket. The room seemed to stretch, every second drawn out by the anticipation in her chest. Daniel noticed her sudden movement too late, the realization flashing in his eye. As his fear overtook confusion, "What? Emily?" She didn't answer. The first strike was fast, precise, driven by months of rage and heartbreak. Daniel stumbled backward, his hands grasping at hers, but she held firm. The knife's weight grounded her, a cold, shocking certainty. He gasped, voice cracking, words catching in his throat. "Emily, please. Do you remember Sarah?" she whispered, her voice low, sharp, each syllable dripping with cold fury. His eyes widened, comprehension dawning too late. The room spun in a blur of motion, screams muffled by her controlled determination. Every strike, every movement was deliberate, precise, fueled not just by anger, but by a deep, unrelenting sense of justice for the years of manipulation and betrayal. The kitchen was chaos. Plates toppled, wine splattered across the counter, but Emily hardly noticed. Her world had narrowed to the figure before her and the weight of the knife in her hands. Daniel fell to the floor, gasping, reaching toward her with a pleading gaze that twisted into horror. Emily stared down at him, chest heaving, her mind racing yet strangely calm. She remembered every lie, every secret, every moment she had waited silently, planning, watching, biding her time. "Do you understand now?" she asked, voice trembling with controlled rage. "This ends tonight." The final moments were surreal. Daniel's breaths came in short, sharp gasps. His eyes searched hers, a mixture of disbelief, fear, and betrayal mirrored in every line of his face. Emily's hands didn't shake. They only clenched tighter. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Daniel lay still. The room smelled of iron and chaos, the walls bearing witness to a life extinguished by years of betrayal. Emily stepped back, dropping the knife onto the counter. Her body shook uncontrollably, adrenaline and shock colliding in her veins. She sank onto the cold kitchen floor, head in her hands, staring at the pools of blood that reflected the dim light like molten glass. For a moment, time froze. The house was quiet again, except for the sound of her ragged breathing and the faint drip of blood onto the tile. She couldn't move. She couldn't think. She only felt. She thought of Sarah, the girl who had confessed her guilt and her fear, who had been manipulated into the impossible. Emily had promised justice, and justice had been delivered, in a way she never thought she would be capable of. The minutes stretched, each one echoing in the silence, until the reality of what she had done began to seep in. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She only sat there, trembling, aware that the world had changed irreversibly. Her reflection in the kitchen window stared back at her, pale, wide-eyed, unrecognizable. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a tomb. And yet, amidst the horror, a dark clarity settled over her. Daniel's manipulations, his lies, his betrayal, they were over. The threat he posed to her family, to Sarah, to the life she had once trusted him with, was gone. Emily finally rose, wiping tears and sweat from her face. She glanced once at Daniel, then at the chaos surrounding her. The storm had passed, leaving only the stillness of consequence. Outside, the city lights blinked, indifferent to the tragedy inside. Emily knew the aftermath would be brutal. The police, the questions, the courtroom drama, it was inevitable. But for the first time in months, she felt in control. Tonight, she had survived her own breaking point. And tomorrow, the truth would have to follow. The house smelled of iron and bleach, a sterile attempt to erase the chaos of the previous night. Emily moved silently through the rooms, her hands shaking as she straightened chairs, stacked plates, and wiped down the counter. The blood had been removed, the knife carefully cleaned, and hidden, yet the weight of what had happened clung to the walls like a stubborn shadow. Outside, the city hummed with indifference. Cars passed, sirens wailed in the distance, and the world continued as though nothing had changed. Inside, however, everything was altered irreversibly. Emily's life, her family, her very sense of self, all had been shattered by a betrayal that had demanded an impossible price. The phone rang, startling her. She let it go to voicemail, the screen displaying an unknown number. She didn't need the call to know the world was closing in. The police would come. The neighbors would whisper. The law would dissect her motives with clinical detachment, blind to the emotional weight that had driven her. Sarah appeared in the doorway, pale and trembling. The girl's eyes were wide, haunted. "Aunt Emily," she whispered, voice barely audible. Emily stepped toward her, crouching so their eyes met. "It's over, Sarah. He can't hurt you anymore." Sarah sank against the wall, shaking, her tears wet on her cheeks. I never wanted this. I couldn't stop him." Emily reached out, gripping her niece's hands. "You're not to blame. None of this is your fault." For a long moment they sat together in silence, the weight of the night pressing down on them. Outside, the streetlights flickered, casting a pale glow over the empty driveway. Hours later, the sound of sirens approached. Emily's heart pounded, but she remained composed. She knew the law would not see the full story, but she also knew she could not run from the consequences. She had crossed a line, and now that line would define her. When the police arrived, they moved with practiced efficiency. Officers cataloged the scene, took photographs, and questioned Emily and Sarah separately. Emily answered calmly, carefully omitting nothing but the exact details of her intentions. The officers noted the meticulous cleanliness, the absence of forced entry, the lack of struggle, but they did not understand the silent war that had led to this night. In the days that followed, the investigation unfolded like a slow, deliberate process. Neighbors whispered behind curtains. Friends called, their voices hesitant, full of polite concern that concealed suspicion. Sarah remained close to Emily, drawing strength from her presence, though the girl's innocence had been stripped away too early. Emily spent hours reviewing the messages, the texts, the confessions she had collected over months. Each one was a reminder of why she had acted, a justification she didn't need to voice aloud. She hadn't acted in blind rage. She had acted with the precision of someone protecting what remained of her shattered family. The media eventually picked up the story. A tragic domestic incident, the details sanitized, the truth obscured by the need for brevity. Emily read the reports in silence, her expression unreadable. The headlines hinted at scandal but missed the complexity, the years of manipulation, the betrayal that had led to the fatal act. Yet Emily did not regret what she had done. Not fully. Every night, as she lay awake, she relived the confrontation, the storm of emotion, and the final act that had ended Daniel's control. The relief was tempered by grief, by the knowledge that justice carried a cost too high for most to understand. Sarah, now slowly recovering from the emotional trauma, clung to Emily with quiet reverence. "You saved me," she whispered one evening, her voice fragile but sincere. Emily shook her head. "We saved each other, Sarah, and we'll rebuild slowly, carefully." The house, once a battleground, began to feel less oppressive. Small routines returned. Shared meals, laughter filtered cautiously through the halls, the faintest glimmer of normalcy amidst the ruins. Emily knew scars would remain, permanent reminders of betrayal and blood. But she also knew that surviving the darkness had strengthened her in ways no one could see. As the sun set on the city's skyline, Emily stood at the window watching the world carry on. Her reflection stared back, calm and resolute. The storm had passed, the betrayal confronted, and though justice was imperfect, it had been delivered. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe. The past could not be undone. But the future, uncertain, fragile, and full of possibility, awaited. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and anxiety, a sterile theater for human drama. Emily walked in with steady steps, her reflection in the glass panels revealing a woman shaped by months of trauma, secrecy, and rage. The whispers of onlookers trailed her, some sympathetic, some judgmental, all hungry for the spectacle that would unfold. Sarah sat beside her, silent and withdrawn, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The girl's eyes flicked to Emily, a mixture of fear and gratitude, the memory of the confession and the night of blood still vivid. Emily reached out and squeezed her hand, silently conveying the promise that she would protect her, even here, in this court of strangers and judges. The prosecutor rose, sharp and methodical, laying out the charges: premeditated murder, violation of trust, and the horrifying circumstances that led to Daniel's death. Each word hit Emily like a drumbeat, resonating with the truth, yet twisting her stomach with dread. She did not flinch. She had anticipated this, prepared for it. "Miss Harper," the lead attorney said, voice echoing through the room, "can you explain why you took such drastic measures?" Emily's voice was calm, deliberate. "Because a man I trusted for years betrayed every bond I held sacred. He manipulated a child, he lied to his family, and he destroyed what we were meant to protect. I had to stop him." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others recoiled, judging. Emily ignored them. She was not here for their approval, only for truth, however unpalatable. The defense attorney stepped forward, attempting to cast doubt on her motives. "You acted in anger," he said, pacing. "This was not justice. This was premeditated revenge, cold and deliberate. Can the court believe anything else?" Emily held his gaze. "It was deliberate," she admitted. "But deliberate does not mean unjust. The consequences of his actions were ongoing, hidden, and cruel. I acted to end that cruelty before it claimed another victim." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge's expression hardened, acknowledging the weight of her words. Emily's narrative was not just a defense. It was an indictment of Daniel's betrayal, a revelation of psychological harm inflicted over months, years even. Witnesses were called. Sarah recounted her fear, the manipulation, the confessions that had led Emily to act. Friends and family testified about Daniel's charming public persona, contrasting with the hidden web of lies and manipulation. Every testimony reinforced Emily's story, each detail painting a picture of escalating betrayal and the calculated response it demanded. The gallery was tense, the air heavy with anticipation. Emily's lawyer highlighted the psychological torment, emphasizing that Emily had been forced into a situation with no safe recourse. Each argument was precise, weaving together evidence, confessions, and motive. When it was Emily's turn to testify further, she described the months of observation, the silent confrontations, and the careful collection of proof. Her voice remained steady, but inside, a cold ache reminded her of the night in the kitchen, the weight of the knife, the blood on the tiles. She did not regret it. She simply recounted it, unflinching, aware that honesty was her only shield. The judge listened, face impassive, before the jury retired. Hours later, they returned, tension palpable. The foreperson rose, clearing their throat. "We find the defendant guilty of manslaughter with mitigating circumstances." Relief and exhaustion collided in Emily's chest. Justice, however imperfect, had recognized the complexity of motive, the years of manipulation, and the impossibility of conventional morality in this case. She felt a hollow victory. Daniel was gone. Sarah was safe. Yet the cost of human life remained irrevocable. As the courtroom emptied, Emily stepped outside into the cool air. The city stretched before her, indifferent yet alive. She exhaled, finally allowing the tension to slip from her shoulders. The trial had ended, but the repercussions, the memories, and the lessons of betrayal would remain forever. Beside her, Sarah reached for her hand again. "It's over, isn't it?" Emily nodded, voice soft but firm. "Yes, it's over. But the future, that's still ours to shape." The sun dipped low, painting the streets in orange and crimson. Emily knew the shadows of the past would linger, yet for the first time in months, she felt a measure of clarity and peace. The story of betrayal, rage, and survival had reached its verdict. The world had seen a fraction of the truth, and she had survived it. The courtroom's echoes had faded, replaced by a hollow quiet that settled over Emily like a fog. The verdict had been delivered, the trial concluded, but the relief she felt was shallow, fleeting. Justice, she realized, was a concept that could be measured in words and statutes, not in healing hearts or mending broken trust. Sarah had returned home with her, but the girl's innocence had been permanently scarred. Nights were the hardest. Shadows lengthened across the walls, and every creak of the old house reminded them of Daniel's presence, or at least of the memory of him. Sleep was a fragile illusion, a brief reprieve from memories that refused to fade. Emily wandered the house during those long hours, touching the walls, examining the spaces where betrayal had occurred. The kitchen, once a scene of chaos and blood, was now spotless, sterile in its cleanliness. But no amount of scrubbing could erase the psychological stains, the imprints of fear, manipulation, and violence that lingered in every corner. She thought of Daniel often, even now. Not with longing, not with anger, though that was still there, but with a complicated mix of sorrow, disgust, and acknowledgement. He had been her husband, her partner, a man she had once loved, and he had destroyed everything. She had acted to stop him, to protect the family, to reclaim some measure of control, but the cost had been permanent. Sarah sat in the living room, her hands folded in her lap, sketching silently in a notebook. The girl's eyes, once bright and unguarded, now darted nervously at shadows, at sounds, at every unexpected movement. Emily knew the fear could not be erased with words alone. It would take time, patience, and unwavering presence. "Aunt Emily?" Sarah whispered, voice trembling. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily paused, looking at her niece with a measured gaze. "I don't regret protecting you, but I regret that it had to come to this." Her voice was soft, honest, tinged with sadness. "There's no peace when a life is taken, no matter the reason." Sarah nodded, tears brimming but unshed. The girl had seen the worst, had been forced into the impossible, yet she survived. It was Emily's responsibility now to guide her through the lingering shadows, to help her understand survival without allowing vengeance to define her. Even as days turned into weeks, Emily felt the persistent weight of guilt and unease. The world had acknowledged her actions with legal recognition, manslaughter with mitigating circumstances, but acknowledgement did not equate to healing. Every reflection in the mirror reminded her of what she had done, the act that had severed one life to preserve another. Friends and family had offered support, cautiously, as though walking around a wound too deep to touch. Emily had learned to nod, to smile, to accept kind words without letting them pierce the armor she had built around her psyche. She had survived the betrayal, survived the confrontation, survived the act itself. But surviving was different from living in peace. The media had long since moved on, headlines replaced by fresher tragedies. But Emily's story remained in quiet whispers. A cautionary tale, a sensational headline, a moral debate in law school classrooms. She had entered the public eye unwillingly, her private pain broadcast in truncated form for mass consumption. Yet she and Sarah began to rebuild cautiously. They developed routines, small rituals to restore normalcy, morning walks, shared meals, and quiet evenings where silence could be tolerated rather than feared. Emily taught Sarah to assert boundaries, to recognize manipulation, to trust cautiously. But no matter how carefully they moved forward, the shadow remained. Emily had delivered justice, harsh, irrevocable, and necessary. Yet peace was something that could not be ordered in a courtroom. It was something they would have to reclaim every day, consciously, with courage and patience. Standing at the window one evening, watching the sunset paint the city in crimson and gold, Emily understood that life after betrayal was never clean, never simple. Justice could punish, could protect, could even deter. But the echoes of broken trust, of shattered lives, would linger indefinitely. She exhaled slowly, shoulders tense but firm. Beside her, Sarah leaned gently against her arm. No words were needed. In their silence, they shared the understanding that life would go on, imperfect and fragile, yet still theirs to shape. Justice had been served. Peace had not arrived. And perhaps in this world, it never would. Yet they endured.